Alright, with this next King adaptation from Nightmares and Dreamscapes, you actually kind of struggle to call it an adaptation this time around, as to my understanding it was pretty much written directly for this episode, and the thing is we're going back to a previous King collaborator who he would sort of roughly, in a sense, be reuniting with, as George Romero went on to post-Creepshow create the show Tales from the Dark Side, which was this obviously recognizable format of the anthology show that kind of had, to my understanding, they wanted to it was started off as the idea of a Creepshow series, but then they kind of wanted to have a bit more freedom and not have some of the constraints of sticking to that one particular thing, so they changed the title and pretty much did whatever they wanted, but more or less played with the genres that you would expect them to, with that kind of setup. And this obviously isn't the first time there would be a King story that would evolve into an episode of Tales from the Dark Side, but we'll talk about that when we talk about a story that's in Skeleton Crew. But in the meantime, I wanted to go to, I think it's Season 4, Episode 9 of the show, and I'm pretty sure Season 4 was the last season, interestingly enough, to King's story, Sorry Right Number, which obviously, if that sounds familiar, is a play on the title, Sorry Wrong Number, the Barbara Stanwyck movie, which they don't really have much in common with at all, just a sort of play on the title, and that's about it. Though they obviously mysterious phone calls are going to be a mysterious phone call in particular in this one singular one, that carries on and sets off the events that happen in this rather short story. And as we were saying about kind of using the term loosely when we say adaptation, of course this has the distinction of literally being written in script form in the book. And the thing about it was, like I said, I'm pretty sure I'd heard that the idea first was that it was being written specifically for the show, which is why it's in that format, and he just decided to stick it in this collection of short stories. And there's not going to be... when you hear that, though, there is a surprising amount of changes when you actually watch the episode. Sometimes they're really small, like the title Ghost Kiss being changed to Spider's Kiss for some reason. Maybe they thought it sounded more cheesy or something to go with the TVB movie that's featured in the story. But you read this dialogue as it's written in Nightmares and Dreamscapes in the script form, the teleplay form, and you do get a sense quickly that as far as... because obviously King's done the teleplay thing before, like when he did the Shining miniseries and stuff like that, like writing directly for things has happened a number of times, but you do get a sense that when you read his stories, like his regular form stories, sometimes the dialogue is sort of like, is that really the kind of thing or the way somebody would address something in this particular situation? But his stories tend to be so fantastical and kind of take you into their own world that it just kind of doesn't matter. You just kind of take it as is. But now that it's actually being written with the intent that somebody is going to say it out loud, you can kind of see some of the weaknesses he may have, at least in regards to doing something in script form. So it's up to the actors in the episode of this show. Most of the actors are ones that I don't recognize from other things. I'm assuming they're mostly from TV work and stuff like that. It's up to them to bring some believability to the dialogue that is in this story. Especially since it's such a driving force, because there's really nothing else in this story that's driving the drama other than the reactions of the characters in it. Because the only real, like, supernatural factor, if you even want to call it that, comes in, it's one of the very opening moments when she gets the call, and then when we find out where the call is actually coming from, 5 years after the fact. Everything else in between is solely human moments, and how they're affected by this one short phone call at the very beginning, where only 2 words are spoken. And it's yeah, we do get stuff like when they call up the daughter at college, because that's the first suspect of who this might be, because she's just at college and they're afraid that, maybe she's afraid of being away from home or something. And when she goes through this whole thing about, oh no, actually, this is the greatest thing ever, and I've basically hit the lottery, so many great things are happening to me. When they ask her, that wasn't you that was calling and like crying their head off? And she just says, heck no, in this very unnatural way. As I said, King probably felt read good, but May, it comes out as clunky as you would expect when you actually hear it said out loud. And the fact that she asks no questions whatsoever about, oh my god, who called our house crying their head off? I'm not thinking about that at all. I don't... but it doesn't matter. So, and then there's stuff that actually you can imagine working in the text of a story. Like, obviously, once again, we have a King protagonist who is a horror author. And interestingly enough, this night surrounds the fact that something of his work has been adapted to the screen, the TV screen especially, and that's what's kind of drawing everybody's attention in this particular night, prior to the phone call. And the way he says the line when he's describing the crying, and he says, through a shimmering film of tears. And then in the story he says, as us veteran hacks would say. And you would think changing that wouldn't be a big deal. But I think he just, in the episode, says, as we writers say. Like, they're trying to speed it up a little bit, or put it in, like, more, I guess you would say, layman's terms in regards to coming from King's point of view. But it's like, there's just something that adds a sort of, like, they made it even more unnatural than it sounded enough when you've got this stuff. But I can see them needing to change it by saying, like, that probably reads better and sounds more like a King character within text. But the translation ended up not really being there anyway, so they had that. And the story itself, getting away from the dialogue now, if I was harping on that too much, we have some, because the story is so short, there's only so much time for suspense. So you get moments when they go to the house to see her sister, who they think might have been the caller, because they can't get a hold of her now. And the lock looks like it's been tampered with, and she's just asleep because she's been caring for a baby, which they said before was one of the main concerns. And it's like, if you ever read, talking about anthology stuff, something that may also come to mind is if you were a kid in the 90s and you read the Goosebumps books. And when you go, and obviously when you're a child, they're the most suspenseful things ever, and like every single time, there's like 30-something chapters in a book that's like less than 100 pages, or just a little over 100 pages. And so like every time it went to a new chapter, there was like that suspenseful moment that's not so suspenseful. It would be suspenseful to like maybe a 7 to 10-year-old who's like reading, this is one of the first things they've read that's like, I guess you could say, is long form. And it was built for that. And that's kind of the feel that it has when you have a suspenseful moment like, oh no, the sister, is she in distress? No, she's just sleeping. And that's pretty much the peak of the suspense of this story, unfortunately. But the thing is that there is a dramatic payoff to this that doesn't necessarily have to be suspenseful, or doesn't necessarily have to be scary in a way. It pulls it off in a certain way, but as far as the way the TV episode, the Tales from the Dark Side episode, pulls this off, a moment that I really loved, where you could tell they were kind of showing restraint and really going for genuine drama, which is what suits this moment in the story, is when she finds the husband dead, Bill, I think his name is, and it's the old thing where she nudges him, and like he just kind of slumps forward, and that's when she realizes what has happened. And the great thing about this, especially coming from a TV show, or a TV show like this, is that there's no, they don't build up the drama too much. There's not a giant dramatic, piece of music or anything like that, or some big dramatic sound effect or anything like that. It's just so quiet and tragic in its moment. It's not till after she's absolutely come to terms with the fact that he is dead and she starts to weep, then we get the music. But the fact that it waited to be super dramatic really showed a nice restraint there that ended up paying off for the emotional impact of the moment. So that was really well handled. But then one thing I thought kind of added a bit of, if there's one thing that can add to a sort of eerie factor, because the great thing about stories like this, and something King typically does so well, is balancing tragedy and horror, and sometimes making them happen at the same time, which this story, by the time we get to its end reveal, is an excellent example of. But the thing is one of the ways you can definitely add to that is a funeral scene, because there's always just something generally, I mean, even though they're there to, like, comfort the living and stuff like that, there's always something sort of just in general morbid about funerals. So even if it's something, like, really tragic, you can kind of lay that foundation already and kind of have the balance there already. And there's a funeral scene in the story, in the text, that they just cut out of the episode. They just cut right to the wedding 5 years later, which I thought was an odd choice. But you can tell they're getting in a big damn hurry by the time we get to this moment, because there's also the weird thing where they just have the reveal happen right there, like while the wedding is happening. Rather than like it is in the story, and it happens after the wedding. She's just kind of home, and she's in her room by herself, and her husband's gone to bed. And it's like almost an exact replica of the scene when she went to bed, and the husband stayed up until he ultimately died. There was something really interesting and kind of weird about that, but the episode just kind of cut it out to get straight to the point and have her do this right here in this very moment right now. Which kind of really softens the dramatic blow, especially when you know the way it was set up in the story. If you don't know the setup in the story, it may just seem really abrupt and fast when you're just watching the TV episode by itself. But there is, before we go into why I think it pays off so much, even though we've pretty much touched on that for the most part, is something that they changed in the text for the better when they adapted it to TV, and that was the idea that the daughter is now getting married, and the oldest daughter is getting married on the anniversary of the father's death. And the thing is that in the story it plays it up as nobody noticed. Which it's like, how would the daughter not remember? That's what they say. She just didn't remember, apparently. And that was always kind of bizarre and seemed almost like throwaway. But the TV episode, the way they adapted it, has this really nice moment when the mother and the daughter are talking, and she says specifically, we chose this day on purpose, like, and we're glad we chose this day, because now we can take this date that we associate with the father's death and turn it into something good, because now it's her wedding anniversary, and now it's something that represents something happy in their lives, rather than the tragedy of what it was. And they can also use that moment to remember him and not necessarily just see it as just a really tragic day where everything's going to be a downer and there's going to be a dark cloud over it. That they can find that balance. And that's a really great addition that they made. And not only did they take the bizarre sort of throwaway nature of that coinciding with the day in the story, but they turned it into something so poignant at the same time. So that was really well done. But then you get to the moment, the very final moment, where we realize where the call was coming from and who it was. But the great thing about this is it takes one of the best approaches you can possibly take to something in a horror story, especially when it's this sort of, like I said, I guess you can call it supernatural, but it's kind of hard to say, because it's the whole unexplained factor of it, where it's like it's just there. And you just kind of have to come to terms with that. And the characters don't know where it's coming from, and there's something about the unexplained that can make something really scary. But, like I said, it's that balance with the tragedy and the scary, where it's not, like, overwhelmingly, like, oh my god, terrifying. Not just because it just doesn't reach that level, but also the fact that it's balancing out with this whole, it's the tragedy of she was trying to give out a warning that she couldn't. And there's just something so heartbreaking in that moment. And that balanced with the unexplained nature of the power of whatever this phone has, is... Yeah, there's just a really nice sort of balance there that shows, in numerous ways, what King does best, that balance between the two, where it's not just, horror, and it's taking this human element and putting them all together and creating something that can just really break your heart while also going into that unknown territory that's kind of eerie and, you know, frightening when you don't know what exactly it is or where it's coming from. So yeah, so obviously there are some faults in this story here and there from both its TV adaptation and the way it is in the book, but the way they sort of the way the TV episode was kind of able to pick up some of those pieces, if not translate entirely well, as far as like I was saying with dialogue and stuff like that. We're able to take some moments that maybe didn't quite work, but make them so much better and have such more of a place in the story. So there's that. So I was never like that much into Tales from the Dark Side, despite the fact that I'm absolutely into the whole anthology thing with stuff like, you know, Tales from the Crypt or, you know, the Twilight Zone or stuff like that, or even the more, you know, kid-oriented stuff like Are You Afraid of the Dark and stuff like that. But Tales from the Dark Side never quite, you know, pulled me in as much as some of that other stuff. But yeah, so like I said, this isn't the last time we'll be talking about it, because we've also got the story that's in the Skeleton Crew. And then, yeah, the next one obviously will be another movie, and we'll keep doing the back and forth we've been doing. And the next thing, I think, is going to be nice big verses with 4 movies in it, and then either reviews or another regular verses. So, until all that other stuff coming up, I think that's it for those.